This episode of This Agile Life has been brought to you by BrilliantAgile.com, providing Agile and Scrum training, consultancy, and personnel.
BrilliantAgile.com. Done right, it's brilliant.
Released on Sunday, July 31st, 2016.
This Agile Life, episode 115.
It's called a comic book.
This episode of This Agile Life is brought to you by Agile Dev East, the premier industry conference for Agile development professionals. To find out more, go to adceast.techwell.com.
The software industry transforms more and more every day. Agile methods are quickly replacing traditional ones. The question is, are you agile enough? This podcast is devoted to agile and lean software development. Time to welcome your agile coaches on This Agile Life.
Hi, I'm Lee McCauley, and the guys behind me who can't seem to get it together to start a podcast are Amos King and Craig Buchek. We're going to start talking here, and hopefully you guys can catch up with us.
I love it, Lee. I missed you guys. That's why I got to give Craig crap the entire time tonight. But
Oh, boy.
We'll get there.
Maybe. It's going to be a long ride, though. All right, so we were looking for a topic, and we went to our Slack channel called Episode Ideas, and we went back to, looks like we went back to April or May. So,
My gosh, it's like we never actually look at the Slack channel if we had to go back to May.
Well, we've covered some of the things in between then. So version 1 had the 10th annual State of Agile report. And so we're
not going to talk about the whole report.
Oh, thank God.
So we're going to talk about page 10. So page 10 has a list of agile techniques that different teams employ.
Wait, Craig, I got to point out that, every year we've talked about this report, and we've pretty much reamed it and talked about how horrible it is and how we're surprised at the state of Agile. But this year, particularly, there was such a bad report that one page deserves its own podcast.
That's true.
To be fair, though, that doesn't necessarily mean that the data is wrong. It's just so depressing that after 10 years of Agile being such a big thing that they would even bother gathering this data, that we still have the statistics that we're going to talk about here.
So let's start with maybe the good. 83.
No. Lee said we should start at the bottom, and I'm going to go with Lee on this because he's more handsome than you are.
So at the very bottom of the list is BDD, Behavior Driven Development. 10%, only 10% of Agile teams are using BDD as a technique. Oh my gosh.
So this is probably actually the least surprising thing on the entire list for me when I went through it. But
but still depressing.
It doesn't make me super sad because we have test-driven development up higher, but test-driven development and BDD are not separate to me because if you're doing BDD, you're still writing your test first, so it's still test-driven development. But it's a mindset, and I think that's the big problem. Is there are some people who are doing BDD and don't realize it, and there are a lot of people who I would say that they're not doing BDD because they're not doing TDD. I actually find that the TDD percentage of respondents is rather high from the experience of the places that I move from and work and have to scream at people to write tests first. They say they're doing TDD, but they write some tests. Even BDD, they write a test and then they delete the test because they didn't write it right. And then they write all the code and then they go write tests. And they say, well, we're doing TDD.
I hope you didn't really mean that you scream at people, because that's not people first.
Huh? No, it is people first. Intelligent people first. No, I'm kidding.
You're not following the process, people. Is that how you say it?
Process over people. Yeah, I usually do. I usually am like, damn it, you need some more process.
I think one of the problems with BDD is that it wasn't really marketed. It's a subtle change from TDD the idea, the way of thinking about things, the mindset. I think we've talked about it, and I think different people have different ideas what BDD even is.
And it's much tougher to do than TDD. TDD, it's pretty easy as far as the technologies go. There are unit testing frameworks that are built into lots of languages now. It's easy to do TDD. It's harder to do BDD, and especially when you look up at some of the other things that people are doing sparingly, like continuous deployment or automated acceptance testing, that it's not that surprising that BDD is lower.
So I think we have, I think the big problem is like the advertising, and you talk about it being lower, is that people don't realize what BDD is, or either that or my definition is way different. So I would love to hear, like, from each of you in alphabetical order by third letter of your middle name. What? I had to say third letter because if we got fourth letter, I didn't have one. What BDD is to you?
Well, I'm an E. So,
Lee and I have the same middle name because his middle name's Lee and my middle name's Lee. Okay, so Lee, on the count of three, we both go. 1, 2. Okay, I'll let you go first because I'm a gentleman and I always let ladies go first.
Ooh. Okay, I'm happy with that. Behavior-driven development is really the same thing as TDD, except you're doing it from the overarching feature level acceptance test thing. So you're writing automated acceptance tests, and you're doing that before you're even writing any code or any unit tests for that matter. And granted, that's a little tougher to do automated acceptance tests that are useful.
Great. Craig, are you next?
No.
Do you have a letter between the E's?
No, I do not.
Okay. It looks like it's me then. So I actually have a different idea of what BDD is. I think that the acceptance level behavior-driven development is a little different from once you get down to the unit level. And how I look at it is behavior-driven development to me is instead of saying, here's this method and here's how it behaves in all these different states. Instead, I swap that and I say, here's the state of an object and here's all of its behaviors. And then here's another state of an object and all of its behaviors. So I have, instead of like testing a method 10 times and having that be the context is the greater world and then all of the behaviors inside of it. So I actually separate method tests frequently if they have different paths based on state of object.
I have not heard that definition.
My understanding of BDD is closer to Amos's thoughts than Lee's. So it's more a way of looking at TDD and not thinking about tests, but thinking about behaviors. And so you specify behaviors instead of writing tests. So usually they're called specifications. You use language that makes you think about things a little clearer, more from the user's point of view, whether that's the end user, the customer, the user of the software, or the person using the API of the object or class or whatever you're working on. So typically, the things, so Lee talked about acceptance level testing, which is sort of a orthogonal idea. But usually we use Cucumber or something that uses the same language of given, when, then. Given, when, then definitely came from the BDD camp.
I don't think that any of us here are wrong. I think that we all have things that go into what BDD is. But I'm really thinking that this 10% I'm not so sad about because I think there are so many people who don't realize that they're doing BDD and they really are.
That's probably true. I
also think that there's a lot of people who aren't doing BDD, but only because they don't understand what it is. But I do think that there are a lot more than 10% doing BDD from my experiences.
Well, I think not knowing what it is, then you don't know what the advantages are, and so why would you bother doing it? I think it hasn't been sold very well, and it's really subtle, so it's hard to understand the subtlety and why you should do it because of that.
Well, I had many conversations when PDD was first starting to be really, really talked about with Brian Button. And Brian's like, what's the difference between TDD and BDD? What's the difference? What's the difference? Like every day, he's like, that sounds like TDD to me. Every time I tried to explain it to him. So I had to sit around, and that's where I came up with it's swapping the normal context of TDD of instead of looking at what is the behavior of this method within the state, it's what's the behavior of this object within a state.
I think I was thinking of it because Craig mentioned like from the user level, and so I think that's where I've always used it. Although I really like your perspective difference on it, Amos.
We should do an experiment sometime and write some code together of something really small and write it both ways. And see what we think of the test suites. Do 2 different test suites.
Yeah.
I think I've done that before on just a little small unit test.
I did it with the St. Louis Ruby group. It was awesome.
But I think it was there for that. Let's go up the chart. The next one, the next least used Agile technique is Agile games. I wish Tice was here to talk about that. It's 16% of teams.
This is super depressing to me. I am one of those people that sits in a retro and is like, we have too many games. But games are good for pulling out the things that are wrong that you don't realize are wrong, or the things that you're unwilling to talk about. Mm-hmm. Until they like come out naturally. And games help you get there. They help you talk about the hard things that you don't want to talk about or you don't realize need to be talked about. So 16%, that's weak.
So what are people doing in retrospectives if they're not doing them? It says 74% of people do retrospectives. So if they never do a game at their retrospective, what do they do? What went well? What went badly?
Yeah, every time they go into retrospective, they draw a picture of a boat with a sail and an anchor. And that's every retrospective.
And then the manager sits in the back and tweets 47 times in an hour.
So the next one on the list is the one that is really bumming me out.
The most rage-inducing.
And that one should be the top of the list. I'm telling you, if there's anything that you do, actually my pick tonight is based on a graph that talks about this, is that in Agile, our thing is about feedback, right? We want to reduce the feedback loop. Even continuous deployment, the feedback loop is hours to months, depending on how quick your users are to get back to you. Pair programming, your feedback loop is seconds or milliseconds. Why the heck aren't you people pair programming? This makes me sick.
It's second on my list. It should be second on my list after retrospectives.
Is retrospectives on this list, though?
It is. It's actually number 4 from the top.
Okay, well, we'll get there. And then I'll be pissed off about it, too. But
No, I'm saying that I wouldn't do pair programming as my very first.
I have a tendency to say that retrospectives are more important than pair programming as far as the team goes, but I also look at pair programming sessions as miniature retrospectives. So if you're pair programming, I feel that a lot of the benefits you get from doing a retrospective come out naturally as you move on.
So I think retrospectives sort of help you fix problems in the large, and pair programming helps you fix problems in the small.
Retrospectives are a way to get to pair programming.
I pretty much have always done pair programming as part of an Agile team. I've never had one that doesn't do that. My question would be, what would come up in a retrospective that would lead you to say, oh, you know what? I think pair programming is a solution to that problem.
Code reviews, things getting through code reviews that still have problems, quality problems.
So my other problem here is whenever it just says pair programming is how often. Because that just says you did pair programming. Does that mean like 15 minutes a week I talked to somebody else about the code?
Yeah, somebody else sat beside me when I had this really big problem for 10 minutes.
So I want to quantify pair programming. Like, we do pair programming all the time, or we do pair programming some of the time. I would like those to be 2 separate things in here, because I want to know how many hours a week are you spending pair programming. And even if you tell me 100% of the time, you're lying. I found that on teams that I work with, that when I come in and they say, oh yeah, we pair program all the time, their pair programming all the time consists of like 20 minutes a week where they discuss something with 2 people. And then they say, okay, now I've got it from here. And one of them goes off and does it while the other one goes and does something else. And they say, we're pair programming. And I'm like, no, you had discussions, but you weren't pair programming.
Yeah, I'd say my current team only does 20 to 50% pair programming, although we actually do mob code reviews, which adds on top of that a little bit, which is kind of an interesting method. But I wish we were doing more pair programming.
Speaking of pair programming, because mob programming is not on this list, my current team twice a week does mob programming, and it started out as, hey, let's try this out, and now like they really like it. We seem to get a lot of things through, and a lot of us who are newer to the application learn a lot about this application and how to use it. By stepping through it with QA, because even QA is involved. It's not just mob programming; it's really mob getting shit across the Kanban board. But it's funny because like we schedule time twice a week, and it's supposed to end at like 1:30 in the afternoon, and we'll continue to do it. The other day I mob programmed with my team from 11 a.m. to 6 p.m. and it was freaking fantastic. We got so much done. I learned so much. So not only is 24% shitty for pair programming, but I'm going to include mob programming is probably some percentage of these people are also mobbing, and they just marked pairing. Try it out. If you're not doing it, you're missing out on huge amounts of benefit.
Yeah, the thing about pair programming is it's counterintuitive, so you won't understand how it works, why it works. A lot of the problems that you have that it solves, you don't even know that you're having. You don't know when you're stuck for an hour. You don't realize it. You don't realize when you're stuck for 2 minutes when you could be stuck for 30 seconds. So that time adds up a lot. So we talk a lot about pair programming, but hopefully more people listening to this podcast are doing it than version 1 survey.
Hopefully.
If you're not, try it, please. Ask someone that knows how to do it well to help you.
If you're in our Slack channel too, and you're not pair programming, please tell me about it and tell me why. Because I would love to understand like why you would not be doing this. Because I've been doing it for so long, and I didn't do it, and I did do it, that I'm surprised that anybody's not doing it.
All right, let's move on up the chart here. The next one at 25% is collective code ownership.
This is just going to piss me off. Move on.
Oh, this is exactly why we should talk about this one. How is it that a team doesn't own the code?
Because, Lee, I'm in charge of email, and you're in charge of getting that little box on the front of the login system working. And other than that, I don't want to know what the hell you're doing. I don't need to know the intricacies. I just want to work on my freaking email, all right?
Wow. There's got to be so many systems out there that are dependent on one guy for there's got to be so many points of failure there.
Lee, they're all dependent on Amos. Of course it's a point of failure. No, I'm kidding. I'm sorry, I'm fired up tonight. You got brought up version 1 and you guys got me crazy.
You're drinking a beer, but I'm pretty sure you're highballing it with speedballing it with cocaine or something.
I've had about 4 ounces of beer.
So collective code ownership, the idea...
Did I mention it's 98% alcohol? No, I'm kidding.
So the idea there is to make sure that one person isn't your single point of failure, right? But also so everyone is learning everything, is continuously learning about all aspects of the project. We have a unique problem on my team and most of the teams in my company in that some of the people on the team are developers and some are systems engineers, operations people. And that makes it a little more difficult to do collective code ownership. So, if there's some Linux work to do, some Ansible automation, then the systems guys are more likely to have expertise in that, and they'll be more likely to work on that more effectively. So I do temper that in my situation a little bit so that we don't all have to work on the things that are really, really hard for us currently. But as the team progresses, that'll decrease.
It says collective code ownership, which I don't really like. It's really collective product ownership, right? Getting it out the door. Whether it's the deployment or the server or anything, everybody should be able to work on it. There's this great game that I actually play that I'm pretty sure that you guys have played, Get Kanban, where during part of the game, if you use like just the base rules, they say, okay, I don't remember if it's QA or design says, unless you're QA or design, you can't help out. Even though you might not be as effective in those roles, it really has an impact on that game, and you get to see that you aren't getting things out near as quickly as soon as somebody says that you can't work on it. So whenever you start to own parts of the system and say nobody else can touch this, you slow down, because you have a funnel effect, right? If you have one or two people that can do it out of 10, you have a funnel, and if nobody's allowed to help you, or they feel like it's your job, then they feel like they can't help you, which I've been in that situation. It's hard to come in, even though that's one of the things that I fight against the most. It's really, really hard to say, oh, wait, no, I can go ahead and change that ticket. Because people start, when you move into an organization that has ownership, you have the, instead of doing a code review and just fixing the little problems, it's like throwing it over the wall. You say, hey, this is, you misspelled this, instead of just fixing it.
And it's one thing that would fix this problem in a team: pair programming.
Pairing, yes.
How about that?
God, it's like a solution. It's like a solution to everything, except for Agile games. It's not going to fix that, but it will fix TDD because you'll call people out while you're working with them. So anyway,
all right, let's move up the chart. Coming in at 27% is continuous deployment. This one actually doesn't surprise me.
It does not surprise me. It does not depress me per se, but disappoint a little bit. Like, I would like to see it around 50. That would make me feel good. I would feel like we're making some progress. But again, we're all about feedback, right? In Agile.
Absolutely. Although I do kind of see, in some cases, from a business perspective, when you're talking about a product and there's more than just, can I get the software out the door? There's also we've also got to create training material, and so there are occasions when it is not necessarily practical to just do continuous deployment. However, that doesn't necessarily mean that you've got an excuse.
Well, those occasions seem to be more dependent on exactly the thing that you're releasing instead of an entire product, right? So if you have something where you're changing the way things work, you might need to be releasing some documentation along with it. So you might hold on to it for a little bit. But when you're like tweaking small things and moving forward, the ability to get feedback and get it out there, and the risk, if I'm deploying 15 things, my risk is a whole lot higher than deploying one. And most of the time, the change blindness problem leads to people won't notice, and even if you add a new feature, they'll start to use it before you have to give them documentation. And then you'll fix bugs with it before it's widespread use.
Yeah, I think continuous deployment is a bit more advanced technique, and it's usually after you've sort of gotten rolling. Your first month or a couple months of deployments, you probably don't need to deploy a couple times a day, which is what continuous deployment means to me.
Shut up, Craig. Yes, you should. It should be like the first thing you set up.
Well, no, I don't disagree with that.
That's an excellent point. If you set these things up early in a project, all these things that seem hard, set them up when they're at the very beginning of a project, when they're the easiest, and then it's much easier to just keep up with them.
That's true.
If you're not doing continuous deployment, I want you to sit down and do the 5 whys with whoever decides that you can't continuous deploy, and figure out what exactly makes it that you can't, and if you can go around that even part of the time. Right? Like if you're doing bug fixes, can we continuously deploy bug fixes, but maybe not big features? If you have legal requirements, I can understand. I've not been able to go through 5 whys with people and end up to a point where they're like, okay, we need to start working toward continuous deployment. Because I can't find a really strong reason not to once I start going through the 5 whys. It's not money and it's not legal requirements. Move on.
So the one that I would have right now at the company I'm at is fear. The ultimate users don't trust the IT department to be able to deploy something that is free of bugs, and they won't see the bug for 2 months. And by then, it's cost them millions of dollars.
That's because they're not doing BDD and pair programming.
You're absolutely right, because they spent 15 years on this product, and they just brought us in a couple of months ago, and so they've got all this history of bad feelings and bad code. And now we've got to get around to that, and it's not going to happen overnight.
Yeah.
How many podcasts have we done on trust and going in with trust and doing trust? And I think like a week ago we had one on trust. It might have been 2 weeks ago.
And we're starting to build that trust, but it's going to take a while.
Yeah.
Let's start trusting the small, though, right? So again, if you go through the 5 whys, maybe we can start saying, well, bug fixes. Let's try to continuous deploy those, because who the hell wants to sit around with a bug for a month or a week while we wait for a deployment time period? And so at least we can start to build trust on fixing bugs and moving towards that.
Before we go on, let me tell you about our sponsor. Agile Dev East is the premier industry event covering the latest techniques and topics in the Agile universe. Learn both foundational knowledge and new methodologies to develop skills, supercharge knowledge, and re-energize your career growth. This year's event will take place November 13th through the 18th in Orlando, Florida. As an added bonus, the event is co-located with Better Software and DevOps East conferences. Your one registration automatically gives you access to all 3 programs. This means you can choose from over 100 learning and networking opportunities to build a customized week of learning that fits you and your organization's specific needs. Explore the program at adceast.techwell.com. Also, don't miss the Agile Leadership Summit at the end of the conference. The summit is a full day of in-depth discussion about increasing leadership mastery, with the opportunity to learn new ways to challenge your personal leadership growth and to lead in your organizational challenges. This Agile Life listeners receive an exclusive discount of up to $600 off with code AgileLife when they register by the September 16th super early bird deadline at adceast.techwell.com.
All right. I think we've talked that one out for now. Moving up the chart, 28% automated acceptance testing. So things like
we have not made it very far.
No.
Just so you know.
We're about a quarter, maybe.
Yeah, I don't even know if we're that far.
So I feel really bad for your testers, your quality assurance department, if they have to manually acceptance test every single thing that's in the GUI every single time you do a release. And that's probably why you're not doing continuous deployment.
Well, and I actually understand this more than anything else in relation with the other things that we've already seen, is that, to me, I'm actually surprised that we have more automated acceptance testing than we do PDD and pair programming, because automated acceptance testing is harder if you don't understand testing in general in the first place. Because you run into timing issues. You have to be able to write tests that deal with asynchronous behavior, and so it can be painful if you haven't practiced at it. But the best way to get those things done is to practice. You don't get better at something by wishing that you were better,
and to start with it. Yeah, you're right that the acceptance level tests are so much more brutal almost everywhere I've seen than unit tests.
And if you have a project that's been around for a long time, it can be really hard to start that up because your project isn't set up in a way in which it can be easily acceptance tested. Not saying it can't be. It just you might bang your head against the table a few times before you actually get something working.
Lee, you got any input?
We should probably do an entire podcast just on the testing pyramid. Because this right now I've got I mentioned the fact that the ultimate users don't really have confidence and trust in the IT department to give them a product, but they do have a slew of automated acceptance tests in Cucumber and some other things, so that their testing pyramid looks more like a cone. So that they've got a ton of these automated Cucumber tests and only a few unit tests. You get the idea. So, but it's horribly difficult to maintain. It's not sustainable.
So is that podcast title going to be Valley of the Kings?
Maybe.
All right. Anyway, bad joke. I'm not funny. Craig didn't laugh. I'm not funny.
Oh, you're not. All right. Next one up is story mapping at 30%. And I'll have to admit, I don't actually do story mapping, I don't think. Or at least I don't know exactly what it is.
Story mapping, we probably need to do some research and talk about that some other time. But really, test-driven development, 33%. Hey, all I can say is at least it's a higher percentage than continuous deployment.
Why is it this 90 to 100%? It's not that hard.
Yeah, I don't expect it to ever be at 100% because no matter how much you teach people, even when people see it and see it work, it is work until you get past the point where it becomes natural. It's hard. It's hard when you start, and when things are hard, people are like, I could just write this freaking code, and they go do it. So how do we combat, I'm just going to go write this code? Because that's really, to me, what that 33% says is that 67% of people out there say it's much easier and simpler. I'll just write the code and make it work.
It's much easier and simpler to write the code that time. But 2 months from now, when you're coming back into code that's not tested and you have to change something, but you have no idea how that code was really supposed to work in the first place, then not having tests around it, oh my gosh, your simple little change now takes 2 days where it should have taken 20 minutes.
I wrote it right the first time, Lee. I don't have to rewrite it later.
Yeah, right.
Do you know how much money I make at $200 an hour to come in and clean up behind people when they don't have tests? So,
a lot.
I could take an hour, but instead it usually takes me about 5.
I would make a whole lot less money if you guys would write tests all the time.
That's what I'm saying.
That sounds really cocky. I don't mean it in a cocky way. I mean, shit, could you write some freaking tests so that when I come in, we can actually get shit done instead of starting at the test level and fighting ourselves for days?
If you guys would get your shit together, we wouldn't have to come and clean up behind you so much.
Why are we yelling at our listeners today?
It wasn't the listeners.
Well, it might be our listeners. I actually hope that some of the listeners are the people that have these issues, because maybe we're actually reaching out. But either way, I'm still just complaining at my friends more than talking to the listeners about shit that I go through on a daily basis. Like, I do not love sitting and figuring out what the hell somebody meant 6 months ago who no longer works at the companies that I'm working with. And if the people that no longer work there, sometimes the reason that they no longer work there are because they didn't know what they were talking about 6 months ago. And so they're running from it, or they're kicked out of it. And unfortunately, like, TDD comes down to a lot of it, and bus numbers. And the crazy thing is the more that you communicate with the people around you, the more valuable you actually become, even though you are creating other people that can do the same job you're doing.
Okay, well, the next one on the list at 37%, refactoring.
I don't change code. Hell no. I just add new shit.
That's because it's not tested. I'm not going to refactor non-tested code.
I'm curious about the 4%er that are refactoring without tested code. Well, I guess maybe it's tested but not test-driven.
I mean, why the hell not? To me, they should have used a factory pattern here, I noticed. So I'm going to go make one. Maybe you should use the strategy pattern, command pattern. I don't know. Like, to me, that 4% are the people that just got done reading the Gang of Four book. or the, whatever the book that has all the pictures and funny things in it. I don't remember what it's called.
That's called a comic book.
One of you guys knows what I'm talking about. Head first is what I'm talking about.
I've got some good news. I'm looking up the chart, and unit testing is actually at 63%. It's just TDD that's half of that. So people are unit testing, and that's how they're able to refactor.
No, but they're writing them afterwards, and that's a freaking cop out, because I can write tests for code that already does something and make them pass. But that's the same thing that I do. I come in and I find code that's untested, and I'm like, well, shit, what was it supposed to do? Not what does it do. And half the time what it does do is wrong, and that's the reason why I'm there fixing it in the first place. So if you had codified what it should do before you wrote what it does do, you might not actually have the problems that you have.
Agreed. It would help the TDD. That's a pretty clear point.
God, I'm going to have to take my shirt off and get a fan. God, it's...
No, please. We have video on.
Next one up is an open work area, 38%. I think...
Wait, can we go back to refactoring?
Oh, okay, let's refactor our discussion on refactoring.
I'm just saying, like, what do you do if you're not refactoring? You just keep adding code? Like...
It just gets worse and worse.
Rewriting instead of refactoring?
Addition.
Like, make it a big mess?
I mean, my only... I can see rewriting. But I think the big thing is that I bet a large percentage that say that they're refactoring are actually doing rewrites.
Yeah.
And calling it refactoring, because I've seen it too many times. To me, that's like... at least they got the open-close principle down. We never actually change anything that we've already made.
Nice.
We just wrap it. So I'm just confused. Like, what are you doing if you're not refactoring? Does your product never change?
Refactoring is not changing your code. Refactoring is changing your code without changing its behavior.
So either what you're telling me is that
they never go back and make it better. That's what they do.
Yeah, so it's either perfect and they had an amazing architect, which we all know is bullshit, because most of them should be fired, or shit just remains crap. And my guess is
there you go.
That the poop emoji is used an awful lot at these companies.
It's got a little smiley face.
God, look how bad this is. We should go add a new feature instead.
Hey everybody, it's John. I've got to stop and interrupt here for a second. I've got some really great news. We have a new t-shirt, a new People Work Here t-shirt. A lot of people have been asking for it, and it's finally available. So if you would like to get a People Work Here t-shirt so that you can remind everybody at work that we are not resources and that we are people and that people work here, as well as supporting This Agile Life, the podcast, you can get our t-shirt. Go out and get it today at booster.com/peopleworkhere. Okay, a couple more bits of news. Some good news, some bad news. Okay, the good news is there's more of this great talk to come on the version 1 state of Agile. The bad news is you're going to have to wait until next week. The guys got so rambunctious, so wound up about the report and about this particular part of the report that they went on for quite a long time. So there's going to have to be a part 2, and you'll be able to get that next week. So look for it in your podcast application. Look for part 2 coming up next week. All right, we'll talk to you soon. Keep living this Agile life.
This Agile Life is brought to you by a community of Agile developers and coaches aspiring to spread the word about this groundbreaking approach to software development. Join us at thisagilelife.com/community.